Welcome into college football overtime. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. And like we promised last week, we're going to dive into some fun stuff today. We're going to talk about who we think are the most exciting college football teams heading into this 2024 season. We got to get into a whole lot of things because a lot of moves were made this offseason. And I'm really excited to talk about that with my buddy Abe Gordon. Also, Kadyn Proctor, an offensive tackle who went home, was the prodigal son, and now he's not. He's going back to where he came from. Really weird situation. We're going to get into that here tonight on College Football Overtime. Plus, Clemson, they're suing the ACC. They're joining Florida State. We always kind of assumed they'd be hand in hand with all this stuff, but now it is official. But before we dive in to episode 41 of College Football Overtime, I got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I for some reason I thought a couple weeks ago we had already talked about Kadyn Proctor entering the transfer portal, but maybe we skipped it. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. We'll see.
I don't know, man. And thank you to everybody who's taken a moment to break away from March Madness. I know March Madness has been a massive component to everybody's weekend, and I hope everybody enjoyed that because generally speaking, if you're going to be listening to this podcast, you're probably watching March Madness throughout the week. So I hope your brackets are in pretty good shape. But this is college football, and we're really excited about all of that. So
where the SEC does a much better job as opposed
where
to
it just means more. It's just only between the months of October or August to January.
Yeah, not doing so great on the hardwood.
But let's get into this, actually, this Kadyn Proctor news. So Iowa offensive tackle, I guess if you can really call him an Iowa offensive tackle, he is from Des Moines, Iowa, Kadyn Proctor. He flipped like maybe 2 weeks before National Signing Day last year. Flips down, plays a full season down at Alabama with the Crimson Tide. He is a good player. He's not an elite player, like as far as like a freshman goes, but he did play every game and he got significantly better as the season went along. But he has elite promise. The talent that this guy has, the former 5-star, is immense. So this is a very big deal. He transfers up to Iowa to go play for his hometown team after the decision by Nick Saban to retire, and caught a couple of people off guard at first. And then it's like, all right, he's going home. Cool story. Well, he's there for 3 weeks, a cup of coffee. Now he's already heading back to Alabama, where he expects to enter the transfer portal come April 16th and re-enroll at the University of Alabama. Very interesting situation for this young man, but I guess he's back where he belongs.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we would get the real story here of what his process was, what his decision-making was, ultimately why he decided to leave Alabama. I think going to Iowa makes sense. I don't necessarily need, but the why after 2 months he's reversed course. I mean, put his jersey up in the rafters, similar to Carmelo Anthony's hanging in State Farm Arena there with the Hawks. I mean, it's just I do always appreciate the short time residencies of those players, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting if more. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to ask him whenever he does address the media. But from the football perspective here, Garrett, this is a huge boost for Kalen DeBoer. I mean, this guy is an absolute monster. And to be able to plug him back onto your offensive line, a line that we know had issues protecting Jalen Milroe throughout the early stages of the season, certainly in their loss to Michigan in the college football playoffs. I mean, this is an absolute great start for Kalen DeBoer there, along with the contract, which is also a very nice start for Kalen DeBoer there. But I mean, it's interesting. Proctor did speak a little bit. He talked about not burning bridges, being welcomed back, stuff like that. So obviously something had to happen for him to change his mind to go back to Alabama. I wish we would find out what that was. But in terms of football, a tough break for Iowa, who obviously what they could have used him for. But certainly for Alabama, it is a key piece to a team that looks to build upon what they accomplished a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, this is a group that, well, look, I think there are a lot of people who are deleting tweets as we speak.
Right. The meme
there were some pretty
tweets,
wild things that I saw on
the
Twitter.
Bama message boards.
Exactly. You have a lot of people who are going back and doubling back to make sure that nothing they said was out of line or out of pocket, which I'm sure somebody definitely said something a little crazy. But look, he's going back to an Alabama offensive line that was already needing to replace J.C. Latham at left tackle. I mean, Elijah Pritchett. I mean, he's the guy who was going to be stepping in and replacing him at tackle.
Yeah.
But him coming back is such a huge deal. It is a huge deal. You mentioned how it's a big deal for Kalen DeBoer, but it's
Mhm.
also a big deal for just this. I mean, look, the offense, it needed it. I mean, the offensive line had trouble last year. It wasn't very good at Alabama, and Jalen Milroe was constantly under barrage. I mean, he was under attack quite frequently. He would snap the ball, and it would just be in a bad situation. And Kadyn Proctor was seen as a guy who could potentially be an anchor for that group for the foreseeable future. So it was a big, big deal when he announced that he was going to be going back home. And I like the idea, the way you framed the Kalen DeBoer comment, because he needs buy-in. He needs players to come in and say, "Hey, I believe in this system." And more importantly than just the players he brings with him from Washington or out of the portal, it's actual Alabama players who were on that roster before he came. And I think that's a really important thing just for team morale as he looks to replace a legend. I mean, look, I'm gonna get into this when we talk about most interesting teams heading into 2024. But the last time that Nick Saban wasn't patrolling the sidelines over there in Tuscaloosa, the iPhone had just been released. It's been a long, long time that Nick Saban was in charge of that program. Kalen DeBoer needs as much buy-in as he can possibly get, and this Kadyn Proctor decision, I think, it goes a very long way in solidifying not only just the offensive line, but the personality that surrounds that team.
Well, the other aspect of this, Garrett, is just like the immediate panic that was taking place at Alabama, right? Like Caleb Downs leaves, goes to Ohio State. You see a couple people enter the transfer portal when it does become Kalen DeBoer. Like being able to have this guy leave your program and then like to regain the confidence of not the players, but like the boosters and the fan base that like,
Mhm.
hey, maybe things are going to be okay here. It kind of plays towards that as well, because there was just that massive panic initially, but bringing this guy back into the program maybe does say, hey, I got a handle on things. I understand a lot of y'all's thought process. I totally get it, but we're going to do things the way it needs to be done. And we're going to start by bringing this behemoth back into the program. It does settle the nerves a little bit. Again, that doesn't mean he's ultimately going to go on a run like Nick Saban, but it does settle the
Mhm.
nerves just a bit.
Yeah, and look, Iowa just started their spring practices. This is just such a random decision, it feels
I
like.
just want to know what happened. Like, I
I'm
so
very
badly want to
interested.
know what happened.
I'm very interested, and this is the type of guy. I don't know if players are made available to the media at Alabama with Kalen DeBoer. I know some programs that I have covered, they do release the players during the spring. I think it would be very interesting if he comes and addresses the media just to see what they would say. I don't foresee that happening necessarily until he gets a little bit older. Juniors or sophomores are generally not in front of the media all that often. It's juniors and seniors or a quarterback. That's generally how it goes with addressing the media. But I think it'd be very interesting. I want to see. But look, spring practice is underway over there in Tuscaloosa. And I think to that Kalen DeBoer point, the last thing I'll say about this, they are one of the most fascinating teams in college football in terms of what happens when the transfer portal opens. I mean, you think about it that way. They
Yeah.
lost a ton of talent. Look, the portal giveth and the portal taketh away. And they had a lot taketh away, you know? And I think that once we roll into this April 6th window and that opens up again, I think they're going to be one of the most active teams in all of college football. And look, you going and getting a guy like Kadyn Proctor that's already a step ahead of the game, I think it's a good sign for Alabama. I think that they're far, far, far from dead if anybody was foolish enough to actually think that. But Abe, let's dive into this little bit right here. So the most interesting teams heading into 2024. I'm really excited to talk about this one. Do we want to just go one for one because I feel like we're going to agree on a lot of these things?
Yeah, I think you should bring up a team if I want to add
And do you
to
want to
it,
dive in?
or because I do think there's a
Let's go that way.
couple that we're gonna certainly agree on. So why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. So this is, in my opinion, the most fascinating team in college football this year. And it'd be a shame if we don't lead with them. It's Ohio State. I mean, Kyle McCord, Ryan Day, they fell short last year. And Ryan Day is feeling the pressure. So Kyle McCord got the boot. He is out the door. In the door is Will Howard and Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan, all types of talent in that quarterback room. But alongside of them, Quinshon Judkins, the most talented running back, debatably in the SEC last year, leaves Ole Miss a really good situation to come play for the Buckeyes. On top of that, you have Bill O'Brien, who's brought in to call plays in, well, for 3 weeks. Now, it's Chip Kelly, who is only one of the most well-respected coaches, offensive coaches in all of college football for the last 15 or so years. And then you also go out and bring in a Caleb Downs from Alabama after, alongside of Julian Sayin, after the Nick Saban news to retire. Emeka Buka is back. Travion Henderson is back. The offense is going to be really, really good. Knowles is back on the defensive side where he's going to be calling plays. They're fascinating. And Ryan Day is not calling plays on offense for the first time in his career. I am so interested in what the Buckeyes are doing right now.
Yeah, just a couple things I want to add because I think you hit a lot of the stuff. Like, I do have questions. I've mentioned it before on the podcast here. I do have questions about Will Howard and is he just top tier enough? But you also wonder, like, with what we've seen from Chip Kelly's offenses in college, like it feels like he's the guy that Chip Kelly can really maximize in that sort of offense. So I agree with you on that. And then there's just such a boatload of talent there. Everything that you've said, I think, is accurate. There's a couple of schools that I could go to next. I think I'm going to bring up Oregon. This is a situation with Oregon where you got a head coach that cannot seemingly win the big game. And there are questions that need to be asked about Dan Lanning and what he's doing there. But you've also got a situation now where you are set up for another at least year, maybe 2 or even 3 years of potential success at the quarterback position. I'm very interested to see the 2 transfers into Oregon. Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma, who started his career at UCF, has been outstanding all the way through. And then the young guy, Dante Moore, comes from UCLA, had an up and down freshman season, but who's going to win the quarterback battle there? How does that play itself out? You just had a guy in Bo Nix that's going to go to the NFL. I think it's going to be a monster season, whoever wins the quarterback battle there. But for Dan Lanning, I mean, for me, it's just you're replacing a lot of talent on offense, but you got to win a big game at some point. And that's such a big storyline for them, especially as they enter. And this is just like a by default interesting is going to be all of the teams from the Pac-12 who are heading into the Big Ten anyways.
Yeah, I think Oregon's my number 2 team. That was my number 2. And I think that's a really, really good poll because they're replacing Bo Nix, and all he did was win 22 games and throw for more than 8,000 yards and 94 touchdowns. No big deal, right? But I think that you got probably one of the best options that was available in Dylan Gabriel. And it's a guy who he's floated around a lot and he's done a lot of big things, but he's a steady hand. He's going to be there to, I think, you know what you're going to get from the guy. He's going to be consistent. And it's not that Bo Nix wasn't, it's just Dylan Gabriel we know is, and Dante Moore wasn't exactly that in his freshman season. But look, Dan Lanning could bring Oregon. I think they're a favorite to potentially go to a college football playoff, especially now that it's expanded to 12. And then them alongside of Ohio State in the Big Ten, which that's going to take me a long time to get used to saying something like that. But Oregon alongside of Ohio State in the Big Ten, those are your 2 contenders, in my opinion. Those are your top 2 teams in the conference. And there's a good chance that we see those teams in the Big Ten championship game. And that has a lot to do with the fact that Dylan Gabriel is a really good player, you know, and look, they've got a lot of great talent that's going to be coming back over there to Eugene. I'm very interested to see what those guys do. But Dan Lanning, he's got his work cut out for him if he wants to win a national championship at Oregon for the first time in program history. I actually don't know. What was the last time a team won a national championship for the first time in program history? Was it? I think it might have been Florida in '96. But it's been a long time since we've had a team like that. That's just a random question that just popped into my head. But look, at the end of the day, I think Oregon has a lot of the pieces in place to make a lot of noise in 2024. I think Dan Lanning has established some toughness, some physical toughness, some mental toughness in that program where I feel like it was a little bit lacking under Mario Cristobal. It's not a knock. It's just I think Dan Lanning's a better coach. I think Dan Lanning brings that sort of mentality to Eugene that really wasn't there. Even going back to those talented days of under Chip Kelly, I just think Dan Lanning can be a really, really good coach. And that's especially the case after he did not opt to go coach at Alabama. I'm sure they picked up the phone and called him, but he decided to stay in Eugene, which I think is a really interesting decision. I think it says a lot about where he thinks that program is and where he thinks that he can take them. So moving into the Big Ten next year, automatically just a very interesting team. And honestly, any of the teams, this could go for any of these teams that are moving into the next big conference, right?
Yeah.
So this could be USC or UCLA, and maybe we'll dive into them here in just a minute. But Texas and Oklahoma moving into the SEC. Texas, where's that passing game going to come from? You're losing Xavier Worthy. You're losing A.D. Mitchell. I mean, we'll see what they can do in that passing attack. It helps when you have a guy like Quinn Ewers under center and who's coming back next year, and Steve Sarkisian, a brilliant offensive mind calling the plays. But all of these new teams moving into the new conferences, random question off the top of my head. Who's the first new addition to win a conference title? What do you think?
I think it's Texas.
You think so?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I just don't know how soon Oregon will be able to adapt to what they do in the Big Ten. I think Texas's style of play fits more into the SEC than Oregon's style into the Big Ten. I think there's going to be a much tougher adjustment period for those Pac-12 teams into the Big Ten than Texas will into the SEC. Georgia's still top dog, pardon the pun, but I would be very scared of Texas entering the SEC over the next couple of years. I really would.
I think that's a great take. I think Steve Sarkisian was brought into Austin to do that one thing, build the bridge to the SEC. And what you saw with some of the previous regimes that were in Texas, a lot of those teams were built from the outside in. You had really talented recruiting classes. A lot of that talent came in the form of wide receivers and guys off of the line of scrimmage. Something that Steve Sarkisian has put a big emphasis on, and we saw it last year in the way that they played, especially when they went to Alabama and got that win. It was the fact that they've beefed up on the lines of scrimmage. And he, just like Dan Lanning, it's the exact same situation of what we're seeing at Oregon. You get bigger on the line of scrimmage and you are able to compete in the SEC. That is the thing that has always separated that conference, at least the last 20 years. It has separated that conference from the rest of college football, especially in the last 20 years, is that physical toughness along those lines of scrimmage. And I think Texas is in a very good spot. They've got a great quarterback. They've got a great coach. They've got tons of talent all over this roster. They are closer to the likes of Georgia or Alabama than they are to the likes of Ole Miss. And maybe not this year's Ole Miss, because
I know what you meant. Yeah.
But this is a team who I'm actually about to talk about right now because Ole Miss is another team I'm very interested in. And Lane Kiffin, he's finally got the monkey off his back, or at least Big Brother. Let's put it that way. Big Brother's out of the conference now because Nick Saban is officially retired. He's not even on the schedule anyway. But look, not having him in the room, maybe that changes up Lane Kiffin's confidence level. I don't think it is. I think he always has that high level of confidence wherever he goes. But I think with him plus Jackson Dart plus all of these incredible additions that they made on offense and on defense, they might have added 8 or 9 new starters to this team. Walter Nolan, Juice Wells, Chris Paul, not the basketball player, the linebacker from Arkansas, the all SEC caliber linebacker. Princely from Florida and Logan Diggs from LSU, one of the top running backs on that roster last year. He's now a Rebel. And look, this defense last year was pretty middling. Pete Golding's first year over there in Oxford, it had one big glaring deficiency, and that was in the rushing attack. They would get gashed on the ground, and I think they might have found a quick fix in the top overall portal player, Walter Nolan. I think that could be a team that could be exceptionally good in 2024.
Okay, I want to fair or unfair, if you don't want me to play it this way, just say so. But I want to kind of combine the next two teams. both linked and affected by one decision. That's Washington and Alabama.
Yeah, I like that.
Jed
Good way to do
Fish
it.
takes over at Washington. What are they going to do? They've got a ton of talent that they got to replace, especially on offense. Obviously, Michael Penix, Roma Dunze, and then their coach who heads to Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, and how things shape up for those two guys. I mean, Alabama is still going to be discussed in the national title relevancy, certainly expected to at least make the playoffs. I don't know if that's the same for Washington, needing to replace what they need to replace. And obviously they do get a transfer quarterback who kind of Kadyn Proctored it, if you will, for a moment there. Kind of went there, then went back into the portal, ultimately decided to stay. Now, he didn't go anywhere like Proctor did, but Mr. Rogers there does go back to Washington, and we'll see if he can be the future there. But I think those two teams linked by one decision. I think the question is just who could sustain the level the program was at this past season. I think it's probably more likely Alabama, if we're being honest. But those two teams I've got my eye on. And then I have one more. I want to see if it's the next one that you pick. But I only have one more I want to add to this discussion. So it's your turn. Let's see who you got.
All right. Yeah. No, and that was the other thing with Alabama too. Before I move into that one, it's a different atmosphere just based off of some of the folks that I've talked to who report on Alabama. You got music at practice, like the different types of vibe. Reporters are allowed on the practice field, so they're actually out there at practice, which is not something that happened. It never happened when Nick Saban was there. So it is certainly a changing of the guard over there in Tuscaloosa. But to think that they're just going to fall off a cliff, and I'm not saying you're suggesting this or anybody else who's associated with this podcast, but to say that they're going to fall off in some sort of way, maybe they don't win 10 games every single year that Kalen DeBoer is there, but I still think that he's a hell of a coach, and I think he's in a great spot over there in Tuscaloosa, and that's still an immensely talented roster. It's probably the most talented roster that Kalen DeBoer has ever coached, and we've seen what he's been able to do with less. So I'm very interested in Alabama as well, but I'm actually going to head on up to another SEC team. Good old Rocky Top. They got the talented quarterback that Josh Heupel has been praying for. We saw what they were able to do with Joe Milton. I mean, I think, look, this was a fine offense last year. It was okay. You could see the potential, you know. I just think that you add in a Nico Iamaleava, and he could be the quarterback that Heupel has been dreaming of. Look, he had 4 total touchdowns in that Citrus Bowl win over Iowa. It's hard, really. That was such a weird game. They blew him out 35-0, if I remember correctly. But look, Nico blew off the barn doors on that team, and I think he's shown a lot of promise. And just based off of the talent level that he has and the coaching style that Josh Heupel has up there at Tennessee, I think that could be a really good football team. And I know a lot of people have their eyes on this team just because this is the most talented guy who has come under center since Peyton Manning, and that is no small feat. So I think that the pressure is mounting on this young man, but I think he's talented enough to get the job done. I'll just see if his head is in the right place. But when that spring game, when those lights come on, I bet he's gonna get a standing ovation. They are very excited for this young man.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm excited to see what he's got. I have one more. I think there's a lot of possibilities. How many more? Just before I go, how many more are you planning on introducing? Should I expand my roster?
I could keep going. So I know we were.
Well, so there's my thing, right? Like USC.
I'm excited about a lot of teams.
Yeah, USC is interesting because they're moving to the Big Ten, but you got a quarterback that threw for 6 touchdowns in their bowl game, and Lincoln Riley's going to ramp up their defense and stuff like that. For the wrong reasons, Florida, the Gators are interesting. What's going to go on with DJ Lagaway versus Graham Mertz? Is you going to get a new head coach down there? Is Napier going to find a way to keep his job? I think Georgia is obviously interesting coming off of being unable to three-peat. I think Penn State's interesting. Notre Dame. I mean, the litany, but those are not the teams that I want to get into. I'm just telling you, I have more if I need more. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Michigan and Sharon Moore.
So that's the one I was going to bring up is Michigan. I just think the amount of talent that they're departing, mostly to the NFL, but and losing a head coach the year after your first national championship in however long it's been. And I I mean, you talk about having to replace Nick Saban, and I understand like Harbaugh and Saban are not the same guy. I think it's more on the shoulders in terms of replacing Nick Saban, but Nick Saban left you with something. I mean, poor Sharon Moore is stepping in here, and this is you. If you told me that this was a 5-loss team this coming year, like I would absolutely believe you. It may be worse than that. There's just so many questions in regards to that. So that was the other one for me is just how far do they fall, at least in this 1 year moment. Yeah. And then from there, can you build that base to start to build back up? Because this could be a rough one in the first season. And I don't want people to panic, man. Like everyone's going to say, like, we should have expanded the coaching search. And why did we just hand it to this guy? Like this was going to be a bad year if Harbaugh stayed. Like it was going to be rough. Like there's a lot. You got they may set the record for most players drafted this year. I mean, so let's just be realistic about what we're in. Like, maybe we're wrong. Maybe they outperform the expectations, but let's be realistic and give Sharon Moore a little bit of a leash here because this first season might be a little bit rough. So Michigan was probably my last one.
Yeah. I mean, look, you have an offense that's lost its 3 best offensive players. You lose your quarterback, who could be a top 10 pick, which not a lot of people expected. I don't.
When I'm hearing it's going top 5, baby.
Some people say he might be a top 5 pick. We'll see. I don't care about that. It doesn't bother me. Doesn't bother me there. But look, you're also losing an elite running back who scored 25-ish touchdowns last year. You're losing a Roman Wilson who is a Mr. Dependable, and that's just on offense. You're also losing tons of talent on defense. I mean, like, look, it's going to be difficult just replacing all of that. But then you lose your head coach. And on top of that, you have 2 NCAA investigations. Yes, those are still happening. They're still investigating the University of Michigan for all that sign-stealing stuff that was going on last year that we won't dive too far into. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast, but we won't jump into that one right now. But yeah, they're still investigating all of that up there in Ann Arbor. So that's certainly a very interesting one. And one more that I really want to throw in here just quickly before I get to my final one. Bobby Petrino is back at Arkansas, and I feel like it didn't get enough attention. Maybe it did for a quick minute, just because it's fascinating. But what that looks like, he's not the head coach, obviously. Sam Pittman's still that guy, but he is the offensive coordinator. And it's very interesting. He's there for the first time in, 13 years? I think he was out in 2011, 2012, sometime around there. He had Arkansas playing at the highest level it had played at in a very long time, a very, very, very long time. And I think that's just fascinating. Just the dynamics of Bobby Petrino being on a staff and back in the place where his spiral really started. A lot of that is self-inflicted and that's his fault. But you know what? At the end of the day, it is interesting. It is much watched television. As Lane Kiffin would say, get your popcorn ready. But the last one that I have that really stands out as a very interesting team heading into this year, the Miami Hurricanes. A lot of people talk about Ryan Day being on the hot seat. Mario Cristobal is absolutely on the hot seat, in my opinion. This is a guy who was received from Oregon last year to lots of fanfare. He was brought in in a situation where he was going to elevate and finally take them back to the promised land, and he just hasn't delivered. And sometimes I think it's a little bit of hubris, like what you saw against Georgia Tech last year. Sometimes it's just getting out coached, like what you saw against Clemson last year. I mean, look, there are lots of situations where Miami just isn't the better team. And the coaching disparity, I think, has a lot to do with that, but that's not the point. My biggest point is the fact that Cam Ward is there. He is one of the most dynamic players in the transfer portal. He is added. He's going to be playing. He's going to be playing down there. I think one of the things that you've seen that was a consistent issue for them with Van Dyke, who moves up to where did he end up going? Do you remember where Tyler Van Dyke ended?
Did he go to
Wisconsin? Wisconsin. No, it was Wisconsin. Yeah. So Tyler Van Dyke moves up to Wisconsin, which I think might be a better fit for him anyway, just schematically. But there's a lack of ingenuity and playmaking ability that have really plagued Miami under Mario Cristobal, and that should not be a problem at all with Cam Ward. He is a master of improvisation, and he can move around and make some stuff happen with his legs. And I think he's going to be very fun to watch for Miami in that ACC. But look, this is shaping up to be a really exciting 2024. I think There are a lot of really, really good teams. There are a couple of elite teams that I think are just going to continue to do big stuff. Your Georgias, your Alabamas, your Ohio States, those teams are going to dominate. But I think the expansion into the 12-team playoff makes this a very fascinating season for more reasons than one. It's a widened field. You have a lot more teams, and maybe that changes the strategy that teams have going into the season. There's not necessarily that make or break type of mentality on every single game that you play, because you can still play your way up into a top 12 seed. So we'll see what ends up going on with all of that. But those are your most interesting teams in 2024. If we missed anybody, drop a comment, let us know, or add us on social media at GChapATL, at Abe Gordon on Twitter. If we did miss somebody, which you never know, because we might have missed somebody. Maybe you're a big Auburn guy and you're excited to see what Hugh Freeze can do in year 2. Brian Kelly has a very interesting team heading into 2024. I think, can he get him back to an SEC championship game after going his first year? There are a lot of very interesting teams this year, and I think it's a good problem. But our last thing that we got to jump into here, and it's not quite as fun, and this is mostly just a quick mention. The Clemson Tigers, they are joining Florida State in suing the ACC. Abe, I don't know about you. The way I see this is not a big banner that says we're trying to leave. I see we're trying to see what it would take. And that's all it really is to me.
Yeah, they're gonna find a way to leave. They're trying to both situations. They're trying to find ways to minimize the penalty of leaving. And the thing to me that's interesting is Clemson's attacking a different part of the grants of right agreement crap than Florida State is. And the fact that they're going after something different probably tells me that neither one has full belief that their case is going to hold up. And what Clemson is doing in terms of, the way things are phrased and verbiage, it just seems like they're picking at straws here. It really does. Not that I think Florida State's got some great finding that they're going to be able to exit either. But it feels a little bit more of a discussion than what Clemson is doing, just in my opinion. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But to me, the way Clemson is going about it, it kind of just gave me a chuckle because I don't know, maybe it plays out in their favor, Garrett, but I'll be honest, I kind of laughed. I was like, really? That's the best you guys can do? Is pick apart that one phrase? That's your problem here? And so I don't know. I had a laugh at it. So that's all for me.
Yeah. Well, I know Dennis Dodd had said that this could be a 5 to 10 year deal, and Florida State said it could cost around $572 million to leave the ACC and buy him out effectively. Maybe it doesn't end up costing that much money when it's all said and done. But look, I think there's a lot of legalese that's going to be going on, a lot of grandstanding, and a lot of time that's going to pass between now and whenever we get to some form of a decision. I mean, look, step one is finding out who has jurisdiction, and I'm not going to go into a deep legal case study on what's going on here, but jurisdiction is an important thing because we have one lawsuit that's happening in Florida. We have one lawsuit that's now happening in North Carolina, and then we have another one that's happening in South Carolina. So your guess is as good as mine as it stands right now. I do think that the thing that we see is clear is that Clemson wants to leave eventually. They want to have the option to leave because they, in my opinion, see the writing on the wall. Florida State's the same way. Florida State wanted out as soon as they got omitted from the college football playoff. And they, look, at the end of the day, power to them, I guess. But there could be some serious ramifications that go far beyond just the ACC. If Clemson's able to pick apart the wording and all of the other things in those documents, I wouldn't be surprised to see the college football playoff or the SEC and Big Ten or these other big networks or even the NFL or these other big networks, the way that they negotiate with these conferences or sports leagues, they could be affected. So the thing that's interesting really for this Clemson stuff is the fact that this hasn't happened before. This sort of thing has never happened. And if they are able to enact some kind of change, there might be some longer term effects.
Yeah, look, I think it's happening because they're realizing just how much money they're losing out by not being with the SEC or the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And I think in previous years, the numbers were a little bit closer, right? The margins between what you get in the SEC and what you got in the ACC weren't as dramatic as they are now. And it's really just come to a head where they've got to decide upon the future of their program. And really what it comes down to is like, what penalty are they willing to pay to be part of that process? And there will be a time in the future where that penalty is not enough to withhold them from just breaking the grants of rights, and they'll pay the penalty. But right now you're still talking about a massive, massive number. And that's why they're trying to find a legal way out of it before considering other options and possibly apologies for the harsh language, paying the ransom. Obviously I don't want to view this too much as like a hostage situation, but kind of what it is boiling down to is they're deciding whether or not they care about their baby enough to pay that much money. So that's kind of where it is. How much does your daughter mean to you? $518 million worth. Is it, it's one of those situations. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think as years go by and the penalty eventually shrinks, that if they can't get out of it legally, they will just like a buyout for a coach, right? They'll decide, all right, it's time, it's affordable, let's go ahead and do this.
Yeah, and look, they say the money's the root of all evil, right? Well, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have a whole hell of a lot of it in the next couple of years. $21 million per year per team. That's just from the college football playoff. That's not even a TV deal that's going to be done for them next year. And the ACC, the Big 12, the Sun Belt, every other major conference, they're all going to be left out in the cold. And look, Clemson sees the writing on the wall. So does Florida State. I think the rest of college football is starting to get the memo, but we're still a couple of years away from, I think, hopefully from any large scale changes, barring something crazy in the next couple of months. I don't necessarily foresee that happening, but I've been wrong before. But Ed Gordon, that's it for us today. A lot of fun today. We had a lot more heavy podcasts recently, but I feel like today we were able to talk a little bit more ball, and I really like that. So we're going to return to that form hopefully over the next couple of weeks, keeping you company all throughout the offseason. So make sure you like this video or podcast wherever you are consuming it. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you give us a rating, 5 stars if you like. Drop a comment. Tell us what you want us to cover, and we might jump into it right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. But for Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you right here next week. Thanks.